So let's go back to our topic of what's going on in the Congress and what's happening with bipartisan legislation. I want to start with something that's not bipartisan because it is so thoroughly discussed these days and reported on, and that's the Green New Deal. That most of you heard about the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal actually was an international movement that started several decades ago, but it was embraced by American climate people who were concerned by climate change. In 2018, it became a major part of some candidates' platforms, and now many of those candidates, especially in the House of Representatives, are in the House now, and so they are acting on the concept of the new Green Deal. And so I just want to say briefly what it is. It, first of all, basically says it's the government's duty to create a Green New Deal. It is a program which would involve the industrial mobilization and economic mobilization plan to make the U.S. economy carbon neutral and promote economic justice and equality. So that is sort of their mission statement. What we have seen, because there actually is a House resolution that came out in February urging the Congress to move forward with the Green New Deal that had specific points which they hope to see embedded in the final legislation. Investment in green infrastructure, job creation, focus on vulnerable communities, universal health care, minimum living wage, and prevention of monopolies. Okay. So what do you see there?
Socialism.
You mean they're not after our hamburgers?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah?
it makes sense.
Yeah. All those things make sense to you.
Absolutely.
How about to our legislators? Our item legislators.
That looks like Bernie Sanders to most of your legislators in Idaho.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
But it makes clear the relationship between climate change and social justice
Social
and
justice.
health.
Absolutely. It is idealistic, and it is also pragmatic in the sense that they have put certain things in here, for example, universal health care, which may seem to be a little bit off topic, unless you think about it.
It connects the dots.
It connects the dots. Is it passable by them?
No.
Should we try?
Yes.
So, okay, there you go. It's probably not passable as it is. It might get through the House of Representatives. It won't go through the Senate. It wouldn't get past the president. Anyway,
But
so
the
it's
question is, pieces of it go through. You know,
Pieces of
nothing,
it.
I think, goes through all of them.
that's right. And this is not legislation yet. It's a proposal to act in this direction.
Yes.
Okay. So I would not call it a bipartisan proposal, but I would say that this is sort of the left's idealistic ideal world.
Well, there's nothing wrong with having aspirations.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So I just wondered how Citizens Climate Lobby was addressing this,
Yeah.
given the nonpartisan
That's
nature, the
right.
pragmatic nature of your
Right.
efforts, and, you know, does it injure your objectives
Mm-hmm.
to tie into some of these more aspirational goals?
So the political questions are really interesting. CCL is supportive of the goals of the Green New Deal, and CCL has made specific statements about this, that recognize that it's aspirational and that these goals are in line with many of the goals of CCL. But to a certain extent, its lack of bipartisan support would be a poison pill for the CCL proposal, which I'm about to talk about, which is a bipartisan proposal.
So can CCL say, no, we don't support the Green New Deal, we just want to cut their carbon emissions?
That's right. And then the people people from the Green New Deal will say, well, cutting carbon, or putting a price on carbon may be a piece of the picture, but it's not the whole thing. And that's true. I mean, cutting the price of carbon is not going to necessarily change all of our behavior profoundly, but it will get us started on the decrease of greenhouse gases quickly. So, there's a lot of political discourse among different groups, liberal environmental groups, CCL, which is seen as sometimes maybe being too willing to compromise. Yeah.
I just have a question. HR 109, is that the actual bill number? Is that?
That, yeah, and it's a resolu, it's a resolution.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
Yes, House resolution.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, when you have that picture up of the members of Congress who, are with you and support
Right.
word, I couldn't see what it said, under each picture, but I was just wondering the makeup between the Senate and the House with those people.
So that is only the House.
That is only the House.
There is and that's the one that we've been working on, because that's where the legislation would have to start. And there is not a equivalent group in the Senate, but there are some working groups within the Senate who are concerned about climate change.
So if Congress has to choose where to emphasize on this list, are there one or two bullets that they're saying, well, if we can't get everything, we'll focus on this?
They probably are. I think in terms of the political reality of the Congress right now and the existing committee structures, because there's already a House Committee on the Environment, it probably would be infrastructure and job creation.
Yeah, because it seems, and I was going to suggest that
Yeah.
will influence many of the other, not all of them,
Right,
but many of the other bullet points.
right,
And if it started there would be this sort of
yeah,
spread,
right.
domino effect.
Well, and I think infrastructure is something that lots from both sides of the House can get on board.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so now I want to go back to bipartisan solutions, where I started. This would be the next slide, please. So the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, HR 763, was actually introduced in the last Congress, and it was reintroduced in this Congress. There is a companion bill which is pending in the Senate. It is the first really promising piece of legislation that has a chance of being passed in our Congress.
In both houses?
Yes, yeah. And this is how it works, and I think you'll see that it's very similar to the carbon fee and dividend that I started the talk with, because in fact, our proposal for the last 10 years, carbon fee and dividend, is now an act before Congress. There is a carbon fee. $15 a ton to start with, increasing until our goals in terms of greenhouse gases are achieved. There is a dividend that is returned to America. Oh, sorry,
Are we on the next
energy
one?
innovation, yeah,
We got that one?
energy innovation.
That's good.
Go to the next one.
Okay. There we go.
There we go, okay. There is a carbon dividend that comes back to all households. There is a border carbon adjustment, as I described before, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. And then there is limited regulatory adjustment. So the limited regulatory adjustment is sort of the new wrinkle that was not part of our original proposal.
Would the carbon dividend that you spoke about, that would come back to everybody, even children, would it come back in terms of tax refund, tax credit?
It would come as a dividend check or a credit to your tax account or whatever, on a monthly basis.
America,
Yeah.
but your carbon fee is gonna have to be assessed on the same people you're giving the carbon dividend to.
Yes,
Every automobile user, everybody that uses natural gas or oil
That's
for
right.
heating
right,
you're gonna have to pay a fee.
that's right, so,
The issue you run on that is, automobiles are a good example.
mhm,
In Idaho right now, there's not enough money to even think about paying for the infrastructure problems we have on our roads. So where do you get the funding to go back on roads? Well, if you're gonna assess a carbon fee, that's one source of income that you don't have to fix your roads. So it's not a simple thing. And a great example of this is many years ago when we had the Arab oil embargo. We came close to doing part of this because everybody freaked out that we were running out of petroleum and that it was going to get more and more expensive. So one of the things the automobile manufacturers did with the government's assistance is come out and say, you've got to develop better gas mileage in your cars. And one of the ways of doing this was hybrid cars. So how many of you drive Priuses? A great car. And the electric cars look like they might, at least for some of us, be even better. When Priuses came out and all the other hybrids, you got a benefit. When you registered your car, you got a deduction because you were doing what the government wanted done, which is to cut not only carbon emissions, but the use of petroleum. But now we know by driving all these Priuses, you're not paying the gas tax that you were beforehand, and now they penalize you for driving a Prius. It's much more complicated than you can put on a slide with 4 units on it.
That's true, that's true. Let me just get to the next 2 slides, and then maybe it'll help, but I agree it's a really complicated issue because of the downside of increasing efficiency of automobiles and of road maintenance and things like that. This graphic simply shows what I was just talking about, that the oil and gas companies are the only ones who pay the fee, okay? There are fewer than, I think I have a number of 1,500 companies in the US that ultimately mine fuel, coal, oil. Okay? The IRS already knows who they are because they have to pay taxes. And so it's a relatively simple operation to levy the fee on those companies. They'll pay about $15 a ton for carbon. That money will go into the Treasury Department. 100% will be refunded to households. And obviously the point is that that money will be used to buffer, to help protect households from the rising expenses that will be charged to them for fuel. Next slide, please. Oh, let's see, I've got these things. Okay. The companies obviously will raise prices on fossil fuel-based products. They'll become more expensive. Non-fossil fuel products will become less expensive.
Mary, was there any discussion about taking that money and investing it in the infrastructure that you were talking about earlier as opposed to returning it to the
Yes.
households?
There's the most complicated and contentious issue about carbon fee and dividend is what happens to the fee.
Okay.
Because, and that's why the carbon tax did not pass in Washington twice, as well as some other issues. Do you decide to invest that money in infrastructure? Do you decide to use it for green technology? Do you use it for low-income communities to help them protect them? Each one of those is a calling of winners and losers that politically is less acceptable than saying, we give you the money back, you do what you see fit to do with that money, assuming that you will use that money to help cover the rising costs of fuels, but you don't necessarily have to do that. But that's a political decision to make it acceptable to free market thinkers.
Well, it sounds like then the gas prices are gonna go up, you get some money, I say, oh, I have some money so I can keep on driving just as much as I was in the past.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
You might choose to do that. You might choose to do that. The companies who are producing this
Yeah.
are not going to make the choice to keep on using coal. They're not going to continue using coal when they're facing rising fees. They're going to be investing in greener technology. But we do have individual choices.